The last thing I witnessed was her silhouette framed by the sunlight, just moments before the rocks tumbled down. "This ought to keep you comfortable," she whispered, her voice so soft and nearly tender, as if she were tucking me into bed rather than entombing me. Then came the darkness, not merely a lack of light, but a stifling, oppressive blackness that seeped into my being and coiled itself around my very bones. The silence followed, heavy and absolute, and then came the cold. It was a profound chill that emanated not from the stone surrounding me, but from the horrifying realization that Clara had abandoned me here to perish. We had been married for 15 years. A decade and a half of shared mornings, long drives, and celebrations that had gradually morphed into mere obligations. We had once been a team, or at least I had believed we were. I was forever the academic, the woman with earth beneath her fingernails and geological formations in her dreams. Clara, she was the charmer, skilled in marketing, presentations, and wooing investors. She was the face of allure, the voice that always knew the right thing to say, until it fell silent. I should have recognized the signs earlier. The way her gaze started to treat me as a liability instead of an equal. The quiet that would descend at the dinner table when I discussed my research, or how she never once inquired why my latest findings were so significant, not just for my career but for the entire scientific community. I had discovered veins of tantalum and niobium deep within the Sierra Nevada mountains. These were strategic rare metals, buried for eons, with a value in the millions, perhaps even more. I never imagined the monetary value would be what mattered to her. I assumed she would be filled with pride. When I first presented her with the map, she beamed, suggesting we investigate it together, just the two of us, like in the old days. I recall laughing, allowing myself to hope we were rediscovering our connection. She was the one who packed our supplies, while I brought the geological charts. The drive into the highlands was quiet, though not uncomfortably so. We navigated through forests shifting to amber in the early autumn light. I would gesture to rock formations, and she would offer a polite nod. We arrived at the trailhead around noon. The location was secluded, requiring a 200-meter trek uphill. I had noted the cave's entrance 5 years prior during a survey but hadn't had the resources to explore further. That day, a spark of excitement ignited in my chest, the thrill of discovery, and perhaps a flicker of renewed trust. Clara shouldered 2 backpacks, mine was light, while hers was suspiciously heavy. It didn't occur to me to question it. The hike took roughly an hour. I took the lead, pausing now and then to verify our position against the topography. Clara remained a few paces behind me. Upon reaching the plateau, I gestured towards the dark opening in the rock face. "There," I said, my voice catching with excitement. "That's the beginning." Locals had named it Widow's Hollow. "Don't be alarmed," I added, "the name is just a folk tale." She didn't share my amusement. Inside, the atmosphere was cool and had a metallic scent, reminiscent of old currency and moist soil. We switched on our headlamps. My heart rate sped up as I ventured deeper, letting my fingers trail along the stone wall. And there it was, a gleaming black seam running through the rock. Tantalum, pure and abundant. My throat constricted. I was right, I breathed. "This is it." I crouched down, meticulously gathering samples and labeling each one. I heard Clara step back behind me, the sound of her boots crunching on the gravel. I didn't look around. I should have, but I was consumed by the discovery until she called my name. "Nat," she said gently. "Come over here. I have something to show you." A strange note in her voice made me pause. I turned around slowly, placing the samples carefully into their protective case. "What is it?" She smiled, but it was a smile that sent a shiver down my spine instead of warming me. "Just come here." I moved closer to her. The light from her headlamp danced across the jagged walls at her back. She reached out and pulled me into an embrace. "I love you," she whispered beside my ear, her hands gripping my waist tightly. "You know that, don't you?" My breath hitched. "Clara, what are you doing?" She drew back just enough to meet my eyes, which seemed darker than I had ever seen them. "I'm so sorry." Then came the shove, quick and deliberate. My back slammed against the cavern wall, and before I could even let out a scream, she spun around and sprinted for the entrance. I scrambled to my feet, yelling her name, stumbling over loose rocks. That's when I heard the first crack of shifting stone. Then another, followed by the deafening crash as the entrance collapsed in a cascade of granite and dust. I ran until my hands met solid, unyielding rock. I hammered my fists against it, screaming until my voice was raw. "Clara, what in God's name are you doing? Open this cave!" There was only silence, and then her voice, muffled but unnervingly calm, almost gentle. "You always cared more about your rocks than me, Natalie. Now you can have them all to yourself." She was gone. I pressed my forehead against the cold stone, my breathing shallow and erratic. This couldn't be happening. She couldn't have planned this. Not Clara. Not after all we had been through. Yet, even as I denied it, I knew it was the truth. She had orchestrated every single detail. This was her plan from the moment we left our home. I sank to the cave floor, the beam of my flashlight playing over the damp, glittering walls. Deeper within the darkness, water dripped with a steady, cruel cadence, marking time. 15 years of marriage had culminated in this one act of cold, calculated betrayal. I was buried alive, and nobody knew where I was. Or so I had believed. I don't know how long I remained there, crumpled on the ground. Minutes or hours, time loses its meaning when you are trapped deep within the earth. Each sound is magnified, each silence stretches into an eternity. I compelled myself to breathe, to remain calm, but my mind was a chaotic storm of thoughts. I thought about my colleagues at the institute, the grant committee awaiting my report, my sister who I hadn't spoken to in weeks. And Clara. Always Clara. My hand shook as I reached for my flashlight, adjusting its beam. I had less than half a bottle of water and a few protein bars in my backpack. This was meant to be a quick trip, a simple field scan. Not this. The light beam settled on something in the distance. It wasn't rock or crystal. It was movement. I went completely still. There, perhaps 20 feet away, a figure emerged slowly into the light. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with a dense beard and sharp, watchful eyes that met mine with the intensity of steel. For a second, I was paralyzed. My heart pounded so fiercely I was certain the cave itself must be echoing the sound. "Who? Who are you?" My voice was raspy from screaming. He didn't react, just lifted his hands with his palms open. "Easy," he said softly. "I'm not going to harm you." He came into full view, an old lantern in one hand and a large knife sheathed at his belt. His clothes were practical but worn, a canvas jacket, faded denim, and heavy, mud-caked boots. He was not the kind of person one would expect to encounter in a sealed-off cave. "The name's Elias," he stated. "And I believe we share a common predicament." I pressed myself against the wall, my flashlight still clutched like a weapon. "How did you get in here?" "There's another entrance," he replied. "And another exit. But reaching it isn't simple." "You live here?" I asked, my mind still reeling. "More or less," he confirmed with a slight nod. "It's been 3 years since I last left these mountains. This place is quiet. Safer, in its own way." I studied him, trying to discern his motives. His tone was not threatening, but his composure was unsettling. "You heard everything." He paused, then gave a single nod. "Most of it. Enough to know your wife isn't coming back for you." I clenched my hands into fists. "She tried to kill me." Elias looked down, his jaw tensing. "People do terrible things in moments of desperation. But that was methodical." He moved closer and crouched by the rockfall. "She didn't just trap you. She sealed the only source of fresh air. We have to get moving, and soon." My breath caught in my throat. "Move where?" "There's a network of chambers deeper inside. I've mapped them over the years. One leads to an underground river that flows to the base of the mountain range. The path is tight, wet, and hazardous. It will require gear and provisions, but it's our only chance." I stared at him. "Why are you helping me?" His eyes met mine. Because I know what it's like to be on the other side, the side where someone you trust is suddenly gone. There was a rawness in his voice, a history I didn't understand but could feel. For a long moment, I remained silent, simply looking at the man who had materialized from the shadows, offering not justifications but a path to survival. At last, I nodded. We began to walk. The tunnel grew narrower, compelling us to proceed in a single file. The air was cold and heavy with the smell of mineral-rich water and something ancient. I concentrated on the steady, measured sound of Elias's footsteps in front of me. After about 10 minutes, we stepped into a vast chamber, dimly illuminated by his lantern. It was a living space, or the closest approximation one could have underground. There were shelves fashioned from driftwood holding canned goods and tools, a rolled-up sleeping bag, and a fire pit built beneath a natural vent. "Welcome to my humble abode," he said with a touch of irony, placing the lantern on a rock. "It's not luxurious, but it serves its purpose." I looked around in astonishment. "You've been living here for 3 years after I lost my family," he said quietly, squatting by the fire pit. There wasn't much reason to stay out there. I didn't press him for more information. I just sat on a makeshift stool and hugged myself, the full weight of my situation crashing down on me again. "I was supposed to be working," I said, my voice hollow. "She offered to join me. Said it would be romantic. Just the two of us, without my team or any distractions." Elias looked up but remained quiet. "I thought we were finally reconnecting," I went on. "But she brought equipment to seal the cave. Ropes, tools. She planned it because of the discovery." Elias inquired. I nodded. "The deposit I located, it's worth billions. Rare earth metals. She saw a fortune." "I saw science." Elias coaxed the fire to life, its glow casting flickering shadows on his face. "You saw a purpose." "She saw an escape." I looked at him. "And what did you see when you found me in that cave?" His eyes held mine. A reason. I couldn't respond. The warmth from the fire began to thaw my fingers, but not the chill in my thoughts. I sat in silence, listening to the crackle of embers and the distant, echoing drip of water. He passed me a cup of tea, brewed from some wild herb. I accepted it with a trembling hand. "We'll set out before dawn," Elias stated. "We'll need every bit of daylight we can get." I stared into the cup. "Do you think we can make it?" His voice was firm. "We have to." And for the first time in hours, I no longer felt completely alone. We departed from the chamber before the first hint of light. Elias had efficiently packed our supplies, canned food, water filters, spare batteries, rope, and a waterproof tarp. I carried a small pack containing my geological samples, now sealed securely. It seemed absurd to be concerned with rocks after a near-death experience, but they were more than just specimens now. They were my evidence. They were proof that Clara hadn't just betrayed me, she had tried to steal from me, to murder me, to obliterate my existence. We navigated the narrow passageways at a slow pace. My body still ached from the fall, and my muscles protested with each step. The beam of my flashlight danced across the walls, revealing mineral veins that shimmered like ethereal trails in the darkness. "There's a crawl space ahead," Elias warned. "About 15 feet long. It's a tight squeeze, so you'll need to stay calm. If you feel panic setting in, just stop and call out." I swallowed, the fear of enclosed spaces now a palpable reality. He went first, sliding into the narrow opening with a practiced ease. I followed, lying on my stomach, my breath ragged and my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Talk to me," I whispered hoarsely. "What do you want to know?" His steady voice came from just ahead. "Anything. Tell me why you chose this place." There was a moment of silence. "My wife's name was Leah," he began. "And our daughter, Sophie, was 9. She was a bright girl who loved horses." The cold stone pressed against my chest, but his voice helped me maintain focus. "We were hiking in the Cascades. A rockslide happened without any warning. I had rescue training, I knew the area, but I was 20 feet too far away." I flinched. "They were buried before I could reach them," he continued. I dug for hours with my bare hands, until they were broken and bloody. I found her necklace first, then one of her small boots. My stomach twisted, but I said nothing. I quit my job after that. I left everything behind. I came here because I thought if I could find a place where the silence was loud enough, it might drown out the guilt. We emerged into another chamber. I gasped, partly in relief and partly at the strange beauty that surrounded us. The walls were adorned with long, fragile stalactites, their tips glistening with moisture, while the floor was a landscape of rippling mineral pools. Elias turned to face me. "Are you okay?" I nodded. "Yes. Thanks for talking." "I needed that. Talking helps keep the fear at bay," he said simply. We pressed on. The deeper we traveled, the more the air transformed, becoming cooler and more humid. I felt it before I heard it, a deep, constant rumble. "The river," Elias announced. The chamber suddenly opened onto a rugged ledge that overlooked a subterranean river, its waters black and swift. The roar of rushing water filled the cavern, bouncing off every surface. Elias pointed to the far wall. "There's a ridge trail that runs alongside the river. We'll follow it for a few hours, then use a narrow crossing." I looked down at the churning water, which appeared as thick and dark as oil. "Has anyone ever made it out this way before?" "Only me," he said. "And hopefully, now you." We descended with extreme care, each footstep deliberate. The ledge was precarious, at times barely wide enough for a single boot. On several occasions, Elias had to turn and extend a hand to help me maintain my balance as we navigated wet, slippery sections. I disliked how dependent I was on him. I was accustomed to being the one others relied on, whether on a mountain, in a lab, or in a boardroom. Now, my survival was in the hands of this stranger. When we found a wider spot on the ledge, Elias gave me a protein bar and his canteen. As we rested, I asked, "Do you think she's told anyone yet?" "Clara," he was quiet for a moment. "She's probably already made her move. Told everyone it was a tragic accident, that she tried to save you." I stared out at the dark water. "Do you think they'll believe her?" "They'll believe whatever is most convenient," Elias replied, "unless you give them a compelling reason not to." I set my jaw. "I will." He observed me for a moment. "You still have the samples?" I patted my pack, which was waterproofed and secure. "Good. You're going to need them." The thought of confronting Clara made my skin crawl, picturing her smug, calculating expression, knowing she was out there controlling the narrative while I was left for dead. But there was no going back. I had survived. That had to count for something. Elias stood and offered me his hand. "We still have a long way to go." The path narrowed once more, forcing us back into single file with the river raging beside us. At one point, the trail vanished completely, and we had to wade thigh-deep through the freezing current, clinging to the wall. "Stay close to the rock," Elias instructed. "Use the handholds. Move sideways, not forward." We edged along inch by inch, the cold seeping through my clothes. The muscles in my legs burned, and my fingers grew numb from gripping the rock. By the time we hauled ourselves back onto solid ground, I was shivering violently. Elias produced a dry towel from his pack and activated a small heating packet, placing it under a thin mylar blanket he wrapped around me. "We'll rest here," he said. 10 minutes I sat huddled in silence, my teeth chattering, my mind racing. Then, softly, I said, "Thank you." He didn't answer immediately, just sat beside me, close enough to share warmth but distant enough to give me space. "You're stronger than you realize," he said finally. I turned to look at him. "So are you?" A faint smile touched his lips, the first one I had seen reach his eyes. Somewhere ahead lay the end of this tunnel, perhaps light, wind, or the sound of birds. But for now, there was only this, two strangers in the dark, moving toward something neither of us could yet define. By the time we arrived at the crossing, the concept of a sky above had vanished. All that existed was the river, the rock, and the sound of our breathing. Elias halted where the water surged through a narrow channel, forming a tunnel just wide enough to crawl through. "We have to go under," he said calmly. I stared at the current, black and churning, as if it were a living entity. How far? 5, maybe 6 meters. It's a difficult swim, but I've done it. I'll go first to make sure it's clear. I hesitated. And if it's not? His eyes met mine. It is. I recognize the signs, the airflow, the way the sound travels. There's light and air on the other side. I can feel it. I wasn't certain if I believed the signs, but I believed him. He sealed our packs in waterproof bags, double-wrapped, and tied them securely. Then he put a hand on my shoulder. Keep your arms tight to your body. Don't struggle against the current. Let it pull you until you feel the incline, then swim up. I'll be there. And then he was gone, disappearing beneath the surface with a practiced dive, swallowed by the roar. I was alone. A minute passed, then 2. I counted each frantic heartbeat, each echo off the stone walls that seemed to be closing in. I clenched my fists to keep them from shaking. There was still no sign of him. What if he had been wrong? What if he had miscalculated? What if a splash shattered the tension? Elias emerged on the other side, drenched but smiling. He raised a hand and yelled over the din, "It's clear. You're next." I took a deep breath, then another, and jumped. The cold was like a physical blow, seizing my chest. The world dissolved into a chaos of bubbles and force. The current yanked and twisted me, propelling me forward. I fought the instinct to panic, keeping my body compact and my head down. Seconds stretched into an eternity, and then I felt an upward pull. I kicked with desperate force, my lungs burning, and broke the surface, gasping for air. Elias's arms were there, pulling me from the water onto solid ground. I coughed and sputtered, shaking uncontrollably but alive. "You did it," he said, draping a dry blanket over my shoulders. I laughed, a sound that was half a sob. "I honestly thought that was the end, and not today," he replied, and the conviction in his voice helped steady me. We rested in a dry part of the cavern, sharing the last of our food. The air here was different, less musty, more open. Far above, I thought I could hear the sound of birds. I looked at Elias. "What do you think Clara is doing right now?" He considered for a moment. "Crafting the perfect lie." I nodded slowly. She was always good with words. Always knew how to spin a situation to her benefit. "She's probably telling them you slipped," Elias suggested, "that she did everything she could to save you." "I'd bet she's already back in Elkmorn, giving interviews, playing the part of the grieving hero. Then we'll just have to give them the real story," I said. We continued our journey, climbing up through narrow shafts and damp passages that smelled of pine and minerals. As we climbed, I pictured walking back into town, seeing the look on her face when I appeared, not as a ghost, but as a reckoning. A few hours later, we came to the final tunnel. Golden light streamed through a dense screen of vines. Elias parted the foliage, allowing me to step out first. The sun on my skin felt sacred. I squinted, my eyes adjusting to the brightness. The forest surrounding us was vibrant with life, the scent of pine, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the sound of open space. I turned in a slow circle, inhaling the fragrance of cedar and crisp mountain air. Tears welled in my eyes without my realizing it. Elias joined me, blinking in the sunlight. "Welcome back," he said gently. We started down the mountainside. From our vantage point, I could see the thin ribbon of a highway and the faint outline of Elkmorn in the valley below. Smoke curled from chimneys. The town looked small, distant, and mundane. 3 hours later, covered in dust and aching, we walked into the outskirts of town. I felt like an intruder in someone else's life. People stared. We must have looked like apparitions, our clothes torn, our faces smudged with dirt, our eyes wide with shock. We found a local diner, driven by a need for something tangible. The smell of frying bacon and coffee was grounding. But what stopped me in my tracks was the television flickering on the far wall. There she was. Clara. On the screen, she stood in front of a familiar cabin, our cabin. Dressed in black, she spoke into a microphone, her eyes filled with faint solemnity. "It was an accident," she said. "We were exploring a new area when the cave-in occurred. I tried to save her. I did everything I possibly could. I stood frozen, my heart pounding against my ribs. The waitress noticed my stillness and looked concerned. Are you okay? Elias stepped up. Is there a sheriff in this town? She pointed. The station is 2 blocks down, at the end of Main Street. We didn't hesitate. By the time we arrived at the station, I was shaking. The officer at the desk looked up, clearly baffled by our appearance. I'm Natalie Vega, I said, my voice steady, and I need to report an attempted murder. That one sentence changed everything. They escorted us to a private room, called in another officer, and took our statements. I showed them the samples. Elias recounted his story, the timeline, the exact words Clara had spoken before sealing the cave. The sheriff, a weary-looking man, listened to us both and then said, "This is beyond our jurisdiction now. We'll have to notify the counties. Do it quickly," I urged. She's moving to claim the discovery. She's probably already filed for a death certificate. As if on cue, the sheriff typed something into his computer and then cursed under his breath. She did. 2 days ago. She's already petitioned for spousal inheritance of the intellectual property. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I need to prove I'm alive, and that the discovery was mine, not hers. You have more than enough proof, Elias said beside me. I opened my eyes and looked at him. For the first time in 4 days, I started to believe he might be right. The next morning, I woke up in a borrowed flannel shirt and ill-fitting jeans. The motel room smelled of stale cedar and bleach, but after 3 nights in a cave, it felt like a luxury suite. Elias had the room next door. He knocked once, just after dawn. "They've arranged it," he said. "Where?" "Back at the site. County detectives will be there. The investors, too. She thinks she's about to finalize the deal." I nodded. "Then let's go ruin her ending." It took 2 hours to drive back into the mountains. The authorities had coordinated everything perfectly: undercover officers, hidden cameras, and marked vehicles positioned just out of sight. I sat in silence in the back of an unmarked car, watching the winding roads and the trees that had nearly become my final resting place. Clara had no idea what was coming. From behind a cluster of trees, I spotted her SUV parked near the site. Another vehicle, likely belonging to the investors, was nearby. I could hear her voice before I saw her, laughing, exuding charm, gesturing with that familiar, persuasive rhythm. She was so good at it. Detective Morgan, sitting beside me, leaned back. "We'll let her talk for a bit. Once we have enough, we'll make our move. When I give the signal, you step forward." I gave a single, firm nod. I had expected to be trembling, but I was surprisingly calm. A hidden microphone transmitted every word. It was difficult, Clara was saying. She was brilliant, so passionate, but the cave-in was devastating. I barely escaped with my life. I tried everything to get to her, but the rock was too unstable. She paused, her voice catching slightly. She died doing what she loved. And now, I just want to honor her legacies. An investor's voice came through the feed. "We are very sorry for your loss. The preliminary reports indicate a very promising mineral yield." "We're close," Clara replied. "Just waiting for the final paperwork to clear." The detective leaned forward and whispered into his radio. "It's time," he said. I opened the car door and stepped onto the gravel path. The sound of my boots crunching startled the birds, and then the people. Clara turned mid-sentence. Her face went completely white, not just pale, but the color of a ghost. Her eyes widened, her mouth fell open, and her breath caught in her throat. "Hello, Clara," I said evenly. She stumbled back. "Natalie. Surprised to see me?" I walked toward her slowly, acutely aware of the sudden, complete silence. The officers behind me moved out quietly. "I imagine you've already started planning my funeral." I saw the television interview. "Very convincing." I don't understand," she stammered. "There was a cave-in. You caused it," I interrupted. "You brought ropes and tools. You sealed the only exit and told me, and I'm quoting here, this ought to keep you comfortable, she paled. We have a witness, Detective Morgan said, stepping forward. We have physical evidence. We have recordings. Clara Vega, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of your wife, Natalie Vega. One of the investors swore under his breath. Clara didn't struggle. She just stood there as they handcuffed her, staring at me as if I had crawled out of her worst nightmare. And perhaps I had. As they led her past me, she tried one last time. Natalie, this wasn't how it was supposed to be, don't, I said softly. You buried me. You thought no one would ever discover the truth. But the truth was there all along, in those very walls. You just didn't realize it had a voice. The officers led her away. I remained still. I had expected to feel a sense of victory, of vindication, but all I felt was a profound weariness. I walked back toward the SUV. The investors made no move to follow, though one of them started to say something about re-evaluating contracts and potential collaboration. I held up a hand and kept walking. Later, as the site was being secured and the media began to arrive, I found Elias near the tree line. He was leaning against a large pine, his arms crossed, watching me. Are you all right? He asked. I nodded. It's finished, not entirely, he said gently. But the hardest part is I glanced back one last time at the cave entrance, the very spot where Clara had tried to end my life. Now, it was just a pile of rocks. Just geology. Just matter. She hadn't won. She hadn't even grasped the true value of what she was trying to steal. Do you ever wonder, I asked Elias, if some places are meant to protect us, even when people won't? He tilted his head. I don't think it's the place. I think it's the people who find you in it. I looked at him, and for the first time since the cave, I allowed myself to truly feel what had happened. I had survived. I had been saved. And perhaps, I had finally been seen. The air that morning was crisp, carrying a hint of frost and new beginnings. I stood at the edge of Widow's Hollow, observing the first light spilling into the canyon. The heap of stones that had been my prison now lay still, as innocuous as any other rockfall. Behind me, Elias was organizing our gear, meticulously folding tarps and stowing water bottles. The surrounding forest was awake with the calls of birds and the rustle of pine needles in the breeze. It felt vibrantly alive. I drew a deep breath, tasting pine and promise. For so long, this place had been my tomb, then my path to survival. Now, it felt like a gateway, a dividing line between the person I had been and the person I could now become. I turned to face Elias. The morning light caught in his beard, and his eyes were clear and resolute. Thank you, I said softly, for all of it. He shrugged, a hint of bashfulness in his gesture. You did all the difficult work. No, I insisted. You came for me when no one else knew I was gone. You were my guide when I thought I would never see daylight again. You believed in me. He held my gaze. I did. Because I believed you deserved to live. My heart gave a strong thump. To live, not just to breathe. I recalled the feeling of sinking into that icy river, certain that the darkness would claim me. Yet, a part of me had refused to surrender, and he had honored that defiance. We should head back, I said. I need to reclaim my life, he nodded. Whatever you need. We walked down the trail side by side, each step feeling lighter than the one before. At the small parking area, my rental SUV was waiting, dusty but functional. I opened the rear door, loaded our packs, and then turned to him. Will you come with me? I asked. To Elkmorn. To the Institute. He paused, his gaze drifting toward the winding road ahead. I never imagined I would leave these mountains. I swallowed. I know. But perhaps it's time. He looked back at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. For you, I think I could try. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I touched his arm, surprised by the simple warmth of human contact after days spent in the cold earth. Thank you, I whispered. We drove in comfortable silence, the car a protective bubble against the outside world. When we arrived in town, the streets were peaceful, with locals going about their morning routines, oblivious to the drama that had just concluded up on the mountain. I pulled into the lot beside the Geology Institute. The building looked unchanged, but I felt profoundly different. Inside, Director Ramirez welcomed me as if I were a miracle. He gripped my hand tightly and congratulated me on the evidence I had submitted. In a back office, I signed the documents that officially restored my name to the discovery. The burden of fraudulent death certificates and forged inheritance claims dissolved under the crisp seal of truth. Later, Elias and I strolled through hallways lined with rock displays and mineral maps. I showed him the laboratory where I had first identified the tantalum veins, and the conference room where I would soon present my official findings. He listened attentively, a genuine interest illuminating his face. "This is your world," he said. "I'm honored that you're sharing it with me." I gave a light, free laugh. "And you? Where do you belong now?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Somewhere between the silence of the caves and the pulse of humanity. Maybe. Here with you's my breath caught." This wasn't born of gratitude, pity, or convenience. It was something more profound, a mutual choice to step into an uncertain future together because we had faced fear and betrayal and emerged stronger. Over the following weeks, I returned to my fieldwork, this time with a full crew, legal safeguards, and a strategy for sustainable resource extraction. Elias remained with me, providing safety assessments and offering survival training to the new team members. The Institute officially renamed the site Vega Ridge in my honor. I accepted the recognition with a quiet sense of pride. One evening, long after the lab had emptied, Elias knocked on my office door, holding 2 steaming mugs of tea. Outside, the twilight sky was deepening into a canvas of stars. I joined him on the small balcony. "I've been thinking," he said, handing me a mug, "about what comes next." I took a sip, enjoying the warmth as he met my eyes. "I want to stay. I want to build something with you. I don't know the first thing about the academic world, but I do know about loyalty and courage and how to find light in the darkest of places." A gentle breeze stirred, lifting a few strands of my hair. I felt my heart open, as if the mountain itself had set me free. "I would like that," I said, and I meant it. He smiled, a mixture of relief and hope in his expression. "Then let's start here." We clinked our mugs together, the sound echoing softly in the night air. I thought of Widow's Hollow, once intended as my grave, now a symbol of my resilience. And I thought of the man who had rescued me, who had chosen to believe in me when no one else could. The world beyond these mountains was vast and unpredictable, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I had my discovery back, my voice had been restored, and beside me stood a man whose unwavering faith had saved my life. As the stars wheeled overhead, I made a silent promise to myself to honor this second chance, to live without reservation, and to never again let darkness obscure my truth. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was only the beginning.